Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. Core to all of our mission and core to all of our programs is collaboration. We very much feel and believe, the Alliance staff and our collaborative partners, that together we make a difference and we scale collectively through our collaboration. And the S2, or the Sustainability Series, which is hosting this event tonight, is a perfect example of that. We're collaborating with the Wirth Chair in Sustainable Development at the University of Denver School of Public Affairs. And I think Paul Teskey is here tonight, who's actually the dean. If you wouldn't mind raising your hand, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. And the energy series this year, for a sustainability series, our theme is our clean energy future now. We cannot wait to implement a clean energy future in the future. It has to be actualized now as we live and breathe. And so that's what this year's series is devoted to. And tonight we are here to learn about sustaining our snowpack and sustainability as it relates to the ski industry that we all know and love here in Colorado. The Sustainability Series is the first Tuesday of every month, so please mark your calendars and come on back. At the end of the event tonight, I'll share with you a little bit more about the event we're going to be having in June, focusing on women in the clean energy economy that we're really excited about. Tonight we are here to learn more about ski area sustainability and what that looks like, how are resorts adapting and mitigating climate change. And when you look at Colorado and the population statistics, I'm sure you've heard that our population is projected to double by 2050. I personally think a huge factor in that is our recreational lifestyle, is the proximity we have to mountains and the fun that we all enjoy in the beautiful Rocky Mountains. And the darling of that in the winter is our ski areas. And so as our population continues to grow, how are resorts assessing that in their climate change strategies? How are they adapting and mitigating as our climate changes? A really important piece of that is when you look to the economy. In Colorado last year, 2015, the ski area accounted for $4.8 billion with a B in revenue for the state of Colorado. And that accounted for 46,000 jobs. And so it's not just recreation, it's not just the environmental impact, it's also the economic impact in our state. And the long-term viability of ski areas and resorts is dependent on good snowpack. It's dependent on having people come to our state to enjoy the recreation that we get to every day as residents. And so that's a really crucial thought as we engage with the dialogue tonight, is that it does have huge economic impact across the entire state and across the globe. So we're going to be exploring these concepts tonight, and I would like to take a moment now to introduce our wonderful panel and thank them very much for coming tonight. So first we have Jorge Rivera, who is here on sabbatical from George Washington University. And he spent the last 6 months here up in our Front Range Mountains actually studying the resorts. He actually used to work for the School of Public Affairs here, and now is a faculty at George Washington University. And he brings with him 25 years of the academic perspective of studying ski area resorts and their sustainability practices. Moving on down the line, we have Ms. Judy Dorsey, who is the president and principal engineer of Brendle Group, who's one of our wonderful tenants. And Judy brings with her 15 years of real-life sustainability applications that the Brendle Group has worked with consulting ski areas from NSAA Sustainable Slope, NSAA Climate Change, and leading resorts throughout the U.S., including A Basin, Aspen, Alta, Jackson Hole, Taos, and Steamboat. Moving on down the line, we have Shaw Miklas, who's the guest service manager and sustainability manager for one of the darlings in the Front Range, A Basin, or Arapahoe Basin. And also down here accompanying her is Michael Nathan, who's the assistant guest service and sustainability manager, also at A Basin. And they'll share with us the real-life application perspective of sustainability across A Basin sustainability initiatives. So before I turn it to the panel, I just want to overview what to expect from this evening. We'll have a few questions from myself of the panel to get the conversation started. And then I will actually let the panel ask a few questions of each other. You might notice as the conversation continues, there might be some differing of opinions, different viewpoints, different perspectives, as we're combining academia, consulting, and real-life application. And we definitely welcome that. We want to hear from their perspectives. And then the last 20 minutes of the evening, we'll open it up to you folks. If you have any questions, have the panel go at them and let them know what you're curious about learning. I also will play timekeeper, just so the panelists know if we're getting close, I'll give you a time call, and we'll just continue moving along that way. So my first question here is actually for Jorge. So Jorge, after studying the ski area industry for 25 years from the academic perspective, can you share with us some of your lesson learned and key takeaways as you progress in your career?
Hello everybody, thanks for being here. I didn't expect so many people, so it's nice to have a chance to share with you some of what we've been doing. This is a work that I've done with multiple other people. Some of them my graduate students, particular one that I have now, and then another one was my former doctoral student, now a professor at the University of Massachusetts. And we've been studying the ski industry for a long time, looking at different aspects of how ski areas behave, particularly in the western U.S. But what I'm going to talk about today is about how ski areas are trying to adapt to variations in levels of temperature, levels of snowfall, and also how they are, in some cases, responding with mitigation actions to try to reduce the causes of this variation in snowfall and levels of temperature. Now, if you are a skier or snowboarder, the most obvious tactic that you can see when you go to a ski area that these areas are adopting to deal with variations in snowfall or temperature is this, snow making. Particularly you go in the early months of the ski season. And ski areas all across the western U.S. have been investing hundreds of millions of dollars trying to create very effective and very, in some cases, massive systems of the snowmaking. This is a picture of Alta in, Mammoth Ski Resort in California. This is an advertisement that came out in the LA Times about 2 years ago. Now, from the perspective of us academics who are interested in understanding how companies adapt to adverse conditions in the external environment, this is an interesting advertisement. Can ski areas really adapt to changes in the climate? And more general, can companies really adapt to adverse conditions that they can encounter, whether they come from nature or from financial conditions or from competition? So what we have is two very simple questions. These are actually, by the way, all questions for academics and for managers that try to study this. If you think about the general question and you leave climate change aside for a minute, a general question that is important for both practitioners and academics that want to understand how organizations behave and how they succeed is, can you adapt to the external conditions of the environment? Whether this environment is an economic environment, a political environment, or in this case, natural environment. And what we have here is basically two perspectives. One perspective says, well, organizations and managers in organizations are actually able to adapt to the external conditions in the environment, whether this is economic, political, or natural environment. Managers are able to perceive the negative signals from the outside, they change their tactics, and accordingly to be able to survive. That's one perspective. Another perspective that is well established too is that managers say, well, even if you're able to perceive the external conditions on the environment, the unfavorable external conditions on the environment, in most cases, managers of organizations are not able to adapt. and to adjust what they do, even if they are able to perceive these negative conditions, which is a big assumption. In many cases, managers are not able to perceive that there is a negative condition in the external environment. And let me give you just a little example outside the ski industry. It's well known by academics that out of all the companies that are formed in the US, only 5% are able to survive after 10 years. So that tells you a lot. No, most firms created in this country are actually not able to adapt to negative conditions or to the challenges they face. Another example, more illustrative, could be companies that are listed in the Dow Jones Index. There's 20 companies, no, and every day at 6 p.m. on the national news, you hear say, "Oh, the Dow went up or down." It's reported in every newspaper. Of the 20 companies that were in the Dow in the 1980s, how many do you think there are still listed in the Dow now? 50% of them? 25%? 20%? Okay, so 50. Actually, of the 20 that were listed in the 1980s, only 4 still remain in the Dow Jones. So that's, again, another indication of how difficult it is for companies to try to survive and to succeed when they confront different unfavorable conditions in the environment. So what we are trying to do now is looking at this old question about whether organizations can adapt to unfavorable conditions in the environment by looking at something that has been heavily ignored by academics. Most of the studies about adaptation look at how companies can adapt to negative financial conditions created outside, or negative economic conditions, or political upheaval if you are a multinational corporation that is investing in other markets outside the US. So most of the studies that have examined this look at unfavorable conditions in the economic or political or industrial competitive context, and the environment is, the natural environment is taken as a given. You were to read all these articles in the economics and political science and management literature, and there is thousands of them, you come back with the idea that natural environment doesn't exist. It's just there, and we just take advantage of it. There's no unfavorable conditions coming from the natural environment. So for us, this is an interesting area because most of the knowledge that we have about how companies adapt comes from adaptation to economic or political unfavorable conditions. And they take the natural environment as a given, but if you live in Colorado or you work in a ski resort, you know that besides the competition, besides negative economic conditions or political upheavals or maybe violent disasters in other parts that affect traveling, of course you have to deal in your everyday today with adverse conditions in the natural environment. Do you get enough snow? Is it too warm? This might seem trivial, but as some of my colleagues here will talk later, probably you know that if it's too warm and it gets slushy or it gets too icy, most people that go to a ski area wouldn't stay long. They might not come, or they might get into an accident. Only if you're an expert skier, you can ski on those conditions. Levels of temperature in the environment determine whether you can open in November and whether you close in April, or you extend the season to May. If you don't have a sufficient snowpack there in the ski area, your ski runs are not going to be good enough for skiers that come from the East Coast or the West Coast to ski in Blue Run. So those are actually very important factors that are considered, that you need to consider. And this is just in the ski sector, but let's say you work in you have a business in agriculture. That's also very important. So it's kind of surprising that unfavorable conditions in the natural environment are heavily ignored by the people that study very old question of whether organizations can adapt. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about what we've done. Trying to answer this question, what we did is we collected data on how ski resorts are adopting snowmaking. They are engaging in expansion to higher levels of the mountain or to the north side part of the mountain so that they can obtain more favorable conditions in the snow. Or if they cannot obtain those more favorable conditions by moving up, you can make snow. So those are examples of the questions we asked. We collected the data from publicly available information. Most ski areas in the western U.S. are located in public land, whether it's owned by the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management or other agencies. So you can actually track very carefully what is the ability that a specific ski resort has to make snow. How many acres of snowmaking capacity they have. When do they expand, and if they expand, where do they expand? Then we match that data with data from the National Weather Service. The National Weather Service has weather stations all over the U.S. In the western U.S., they tend to be about 10 miles apart. Using geographic information system software, you can actually match the hourly data provided by the weather service station to a specific resort at different levels of altitude. So what we did is we put together a database that looked at how the ski resorts have been expanding or making more snow or diversifying to different businesses over the period of 2003 to 2013. Then we collected data on the characteristics of these resorts. What is their size, who owns them, where they are located, are they close to an airport, are they close to a major metropolitan area like Denver, who owns them, and besides who owns them, whether the company that owns them is publicly traded or is privately held, whether part of the land is in Forest Service land or Bureau of Land Management land, or is just private land. Come along, Maura. Okay, sorry. Then we collected all these additional data to be able to identify how variations in weather conditions are related to the adaptation and mitigation practices they are adopting. When it comes to mitigation, we collected data on whether they are buying renewable energy, whether they are promoting public transportation, where they are increasing the efficiency of the resort. Now, because I'm running out of time, I want to show you 3 graphs to give you an idea of what we found in our study. The study is already public. It's available on my website. You have it, and I'm happy to share it with any of you. So what do we find? So here's a graph that summarizes the study. So when it comes to expansion of the ski area, looking up to higher level altitude, a number of days where the temperature is above freezing. What we found is that as the ski resorts experience more and more days of temperatures above freezing between November and April, which is the ski season time, they begin increasing their adaptation practice. In this case, expansion, the same curve we observe for snowmaking. But as we reach 50% days of ski or ski days above freezing during the November to April season, ski resorts begin to abandon their adaptation tactics. Now, one question is how many ski resorts we are talking about. Before the event started, we were commenting on the fact that there used to be 100 ski resorts in the U.S. In the 1980s. There is 400 now. So that gives you an idea of where we are in this curve. No? Now, this behavior that we find here is controlling for above and beyond the effect of other characteristics like the size of the ski area, who owns the ski area, what level of demand they have, whether they are publicly traded, or whether they are close to an airport. Now, two more graphs. More interesting than this behavior for adaptation when they face higher temperatures above freezing is what happens when they are instead confronting climate uncertainty. Now, how do we measure climate uncertainty? We measure variation in the snowpack depth in a ski area between November and April. What we found is, for example, here that when you have low levels of regulation or low levels of environmental pressures by environmental organizations in an area, they tend to expand a lot. Their response to having low levels or high levels of variability in snowpack depth, the most likely reaction is that they're going to try to expand and move up the mountain. Now, this behavior varies if they are in a state where they confront higher levels of environmental protection pressures. So, for example, ski resorts in California will tend to expand less, even though they tend to experience higher levels of variability in their snowpack depth compared to ski resorts in Colorado that don't face as much variability in their snowpack depth. But given that the environmental community in Colorado is not as strong as in the environmental community in California, ski resorts in Colorado, despite not facing high levels of uncertainty, tend to expand more. Final slide. What about mitigation? Remember I mentioned that ski resorts can engage in actions that will reduce the amount of greenhouse gases emissions, like adopting energy efficiency or buying renewable energy. This one is even more interesting. The light color graph is what happens on average for the ski resorts. The more they face variation in the level of the snowpack depth, the less likely they are to engage in mitigation activity. So you have a negative relationship. This is on average for Western ski resorts in the US. Now, when you consider variation across the states in the level of regulatory and environmental community pressure, the sign of this relationship changes from a negative relationship to a positive relationship. So what this means is ski resorts tend to engage in mitigation activities only when they are in a state context where the level of regulatory pressures and environmental community demands are high enough to reverse the sign of the relationship. And now I'm going to finish here. This is, by the way, my daughter and my wife are here. This is the first time my daughter comes to see me talk. And when we were having breakfast today, she said, "Dad, you have to be good. Be nice. Do what God says," she said. And there she is skiing in Keystone a few months ago.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jorge. So as we transition now to look at the same concept through the lens of a consultant, my next question goes to Ms. Judy Dorsey. As a consultant, you play somewhat of a dual role between these theories and the concepts and the best practices to actually driving implementation in real-world application. So if you could share with us your view and your key takeaways, your learnings and perspectives of over 15 years of working with resorts to translate best practices into sustainability realization in their operations.
Sure thing. So just to answer that question a little bit more about what is consulting like and give you some context of consulting and how that plays out in the ski industry, and also some of my comments tonight is to compare how it's playing out in the ski industry with compared to other industries. So I think it is important to ask how our ski area is mitigating and adapting to climate change, and how are other industries doing that, and are they at the forefront, are they laggards, are they where are they in that bell curve, etc. So for perspective, we have been in business for 20 years, so Jorge, I really respect these external forces and the challenges of staying in business for 20 years. So that really resonated. And And as an entrepreneur and business owner for 20 years, I also have a high degree of regard and respect for the ski industry because our ski industry is about 75 years old. And you'll hear more from Basin, but while we've had an increase significantly in the number of ski areas, if you look at the breadth of that industry, a 75-year-old industry, our customers, Alta Ski Area, they're on their third general manager in 75 years. I've been working with Alan Hensroth, the general manager at Basin, since 1998. I want to give a shout out to my colleague and friend Kirk Mills, I see in the audience, who I haven't seen since some of our pioneering days nearly 20 years ago. So we bring this perspective of, yes, there are forces that are at play that make it challenging and exciting to run a business. I would say that we, also for context, Brendle Group, we have completed over 300 projects in the last 20 years across a range of sectors, including local government. And our practices are in what we call the big three of sustainability: climate, energy, and water. We consider that the triple helix of sustainability, kind of the core issues of our day, recognizing, of course, a number of other important issues surrounding sustainability. And so we provide these services not just in the ski industry, but in the public sector. We've done climate action planning for a number of leading communities throughout the U.S., in higher ed, in breweries, also dependent on water resources and the effects of climate change. So it's with that kind of context and perspective that we bring some of our, share some of our results today. I guess the short answer to the question, in our experience in 20 years, mitigation was the leading force in climate change. Adaptation is more recent. And in part, none of us wanted to admit that we didn't want to throw in the towel too soon. We have an urgency, we don't want to let up on the gas pedal around mitigation, and yet in the course of these 20 years we have realized already the effects of a changing climate and the necessity of preparing for that now. So I would say in our experience it's only been in about the last 5 years where that's actually matured into recognized protocols and services and tools, lexicon, just like we had in mitigation. So not unlike every other industry, the ski industry has been practicing mitigation for 20 years. They are now coming up that learning curve on adaptation. At their annual convention last year in San Francisco, we surveyed an audience. We had a water session. 43% considered themselves beginners in climate adaptation, 32% intermediate, 25% expert in terms of their knowledge level, whereas the history and experience around mitigation was more established. So the thing of it is, I will share more examples about what is happening in mitigation and adaptation, but when it comes down to climate change, the biggest issue is not just what you're doing, but how are you communicating that in a way that's engaging your skiers, your public, your stakeholders, your partners, whether you're in the ski industry or any industry, because the quandary that every business faces is this external environmental force that's changing the landscape of our business, but we by ourselves cannot solve this. If every ski area in the country were climate neutral, the climate change would still be occurring. And so they are recognizing an important aspect around advocacy and very strong positive messaging and communication. So as part of our work in Salt Lake City for the City of Salt Lake City and their climate action planning, we were invited to a 3-day workshop in Houston specifically on how to talk about climate change in our communities. And I have 3 kind of show and tell items. This is a group called Eco America that's doing some leading research on how to talk about climate change. They've done some of their research in partnership with the American Psychological Association. And this whole entire report is on the psychological impacts of climate change. It is affecting us. We have mental health impacts, physical impacts, community impacts, both real, present now, as well as more gradual over time, which can be pretty daunting. How is a skier supposed to talk with his skiers about things that are psychologically stressful to us in our future? Likewise, then they built on that and created some insights on America's climate values and where can we find some common ground. We know this can also be very politically decisive. So how do you find common ground in order to talk about this in ways that are tangible and real and make a difference in the positive change we're trying to see? And then the third is then, based on those insights, what are some of the best practices for communicating and talking about climate change? So the rest of my remarks are trying to illustrate what we would consider the best practices for talking about this topic. To do that, I just wanted to highlight, in the ski industry, they have an annual report that studies the changing demographics year to year of who is coming to the ski areas. And I'm sure you may have looked at this data too. They also have annual reports on the economic, the financial performance of ski areas. And so what we just did, of all of this 3 days of training, picked some kind of illustrative examples to share with you tonight. In the United States, 23% of Americans' income is over $100,000. That's double in the ski industry. The rate of skiers visiting ski resorts, 58% have an income over $100,000. What do we know about that demographic and their values surrounding climate change? They actually have a very high rate, over 62%, that feel that solving climate change now will cost less money than if we wait until later. So on the one hand, ski areas, maybe 15 years ago, we didn't have this information and we didn't, it was scary. How do we talk with our customers without frightening them away? Well, the truth is our customers are asking for action now because they recognize it as more cost effective. Similarly, actually, this gender topic, 43% are women. More than 70% of women feel we can achieve environmental protection and economic growth at the same time. And then again, in the age demographic, convinced that climate change is happening. These numbers are changing rapidly in terms of the consensus and finding common ground. So given those demographics, what are some positive ways to frame this question about what are our Colorado ski areas doing? And here are some things. First, there on this 13 steps is what this guide said. I tried to take 8 and combine them into a few slides. Messages of hope. People need messages of hope. 84% of Americans believe we can solve any problem we put our minds and hearts and actions behind. So actionable solutions for everyday life and sharing and addressing our share. So from our research, 75% of ski areas are currently doing at least something actionable towards reducing their contribution to climate change. This is a picture of our customer Alta Ski Area. They just this year installed solar panels on their ski patrol building. Beautiful picture, as you can imagine, and just an example of various ski areas that are also now adopting renewable energy on mountain operations. A third are implementing energy efficiency in their buildings and their snowmaking systems. The efficiency of snowmaking has changed dramatically, as you can imagine, in the last decade alone. The other thing about that is adaptation. We did do a survey. Ski areas are mapping and assessing their water supply versus uses. The adoption curve on sustainable water management, over half are employing water conservation and efficiency practices. And because of also, you mentioned public lands in terms of watershed stewardship, forest management, other ecological restoration activities, also very high levels of techniques from slope stabilization, erosion control, retention, constructed wetlands, etc. The other thing about this, to answer this question, is to also speak about co-benefits. And we have published, Brendle Group did research in partnership with RRC and published a journal article in the National Skiers Association journal last year on the dollars of sustainability. We were trying to build study the business case. It's hard to get publicly available data. This was data tracked over 20 years on economic and sustainability performance of ski areas. We showed that through comprehensive sustainability planning and action over time, ski areas were realizing a 2% profit improvement, bending that curve, even accounting for changes in economic performance and snowfall over time. When we get to climate adaptation, we're basically in a risk management conversation. And so we are talking with ski areas, and they're learning the issues of adaptation by understanding the exposures, the sensitivity, the adaptive capacity, and therefore the vulnerabilities of their operations to a changing climate. Snowmaking, in our understanding, is not an adaptation technique. It's actually a vulnerability, because as rising temperatures occur, less snowmaking is able to the snow is able to be made. However, the adaptive management practice that we're seeing is very improved methods of taking that snow and managing it well across the slopes so that you can continue to provide a high quality skier product even with less snowmaking and more efficient snowmaking. So that's some of the lessons learned we've heard. And then the last thing here is strong communities. Maybe Shah will talk about the fact Xcel Energy, in partnership with Summit County, is working on a Summit County Energy Action Plan that has a pillar around supporting ski areas and energy efficiency. Likewise, in Utah, we've helped to coordinate and establish the Utah Climate Action Network that has strong participation by the ski areas there, and so on and so forth. There's just another example. I know I'm running out of time, so just the couple remaining points. Sorry, Brenna, if I could just have one more minute. The other important thing about speaking in a compelling way about climate change is storytelling. And I sometimes use the concept of myth busting, because in our work in consulting, it is surprising kind of the impressions that people may have about something. And the ski area industry is one where how many times I've heard what horrible energy hogs ski areas are and how they are our climate change problems, because that's the, such an intensive and resource intensive effort. Well, we have been working with 30 ski areas over the last 6 years on measuring their greenhouse gas inventory. We also work with higher ed institutions. I'm just back from a 2-week tour working with the 10 campuses of the University of California system on their carbon neutrality initiatives. There's also an airport carbon management and accounting and reporting system. We're not personally involved in that, but over 150 airports reporting their emissions. On average, a ski area's emissions are 1/5 of a college campus. They are 1/10 of an airport. And all of those have high traffic and volume of serving the public. So just keep that in mind when you hear about the kind of level of impact that ski areas are making. So that's part of that storytelling and some of the paradoxes there. I also sometimes feel the ski industry is in a very difficult spot because it may get a bum rap for its contributions to climate change, and yet it's most vulnerable to it, as we heard from Jorge. So their contribution to climate change is very small relative to the impact that climate change is having on its operations. So closing, one of the other 13 techniques about talking about climate change is around the idea of collective power. And this provides a method for sharing, and it enables feedback loops. So 5 years ago, in partnership with the National Ski Areas Association, Brendle Group helped to form the NSAA Climate Challenge, in which required ski areas to do a greenhouse gas inventory, do something around mitigation every single year, and report it. Last year, or now we're in our second year, at the urgency of Aspen Ski Company, added an advocacy component. And so they said, we will join if you add advocacy, because of this whole phenomenon, our impact is small relative to the platform in which we should be doing advocacy. All of these 30 ski areas are required every year and are actively advocating for climate change, including most recently with coming out of Paris, world leaders in various countries, a number of leading companies, and proud to say many, many ski areas signing on to support legislation around the Clean Power Plan. So advocacy is a big part of what the ski industry is doing to have that ripple effect. So it's not just mitigation and adaptation, but I'd also put out there advocacy. So I hope that answers the question about consulting and kind of our perspective on this.
Thank you, Judy. I so enjoyed hearing your perspective over the last 15 years of your really important work. So lastly, and certainly not least, as we transition to Shah and Mike, who are our real-life practitioners here with the concepts that we're talking about tonight, We've heard from the academic perspective, we've heard through the lens of a consultant, and now we'd love to hear from you. And my question is kind of triple-fold, so I'm sorry if I add a lot to you, but what is your perspective in the day-to-day operations in your sustainability practices in concert with the long-term sustainability strategy for a basin? And how have your experiences either confirmed or differed from the perspectives we've heard tonight? And lastly, what is a basin doing to address mitigation in step with adaptation? Shaw and Mike.
Okay. So I think first, a basin is in a very different spot than a lot of ski areas in Colorado or in the country. We sit at 10,870 feet. Our summit is 13,050 feet. So that kind of sets us apart from everybody just based on our location. We opened in 1946, so coming on 70 years here in December. Our lift tickets were only $1.25. We had a tow rope from the mid-mountain at that time. And, over the last 6 decades, we've definitely expanded. We've built buildings, we've installed new lifts, we've replaced lifts, we've replaced buildings, but all with the environment in mind. We are very proud of our environmental record. We strive to be a leader on the environmental front, working with organizations like the Brendle Group and the National Ski Area Association. But even though we're positioned a lot differently, we haven't seen, some of the effects of climate change like California has the last few years or the East Coast has this year. Since we really dove into sustainability at a basin in the last 5 years, we've had some record years. But we still believe in climate change. We believe that it's important for us to set an example for the ski industry, and more importantly, the people that are coming to enjoy as an outdoor recreational enthusiast. We do a lot in the realm of mitigation. We've done some adaptation. We'll talk about that in a little while, but I think I'm going to talk a little bit about advocacy and our partnerships, which are a huge part of our program. We do quite a bit in regards to advocacy and fundraising for organizations who support our views on sustainability and climate change. One of our oldest relationships, or 2 oldest relationships really, are with the Brendle Group and the National Ski Area Association. We've worked with them since 1999. Judy just informed me it was before my days, but we worked with the Brendle Group and Aspen Ski Company on greening ski areas. It was a program, and then a couple years later, the National Ski Area Association rolled out the Sustainable Slopes program, which we are one of the founding members of. Also through NSAA and the Brendle Group, we are part of that climate challenge that Judy was speaking of. So those 2 partnerships have really got us off the ground and running, really, when it comes to sustainability. We also partner very heavily with our local conservation center, which is the High Country Conservation Center. Mike and I do a lot of volunteer work for them. I sit on their board of directors. But we consult with them, we partner with them in many facets, but we also fundraise for them. At the ski area, we have a Snow Huggers Club, just like a tree hugger, but a snow hugger, where folks can donate $10 or $20, to their season pass, and all that money goes to the conservation center. In turn, they get some great discounts and things just special for them. We also have a climate awareness day called Save Our Snow, which benefits the conservation center, and then we also do a really fun mountain scavenger hunt that benefits them as well. So really great partnership there. We also have a very strong employee environmental fund. folks can donate their pre-tax dollars, and they go to 2 organizations in our community that are promoting open space and trails. One is Continental Divide Land Trust out of Breckenridge, and then Friends of the Eagle's Nest Wilderness out of Silverthorne. Going back to HC3, just funding, we've raised over $30,000 for them in the last, I think, 8 years or so. And Employee Environmental Fund has raised $45,000. Half of those funds are put in by our employees, and then Basin actually matches the rest of those funds to go into those organizations. And then over Earth Week, we partner with Snow Riders International. Phil here is the ED there, he's in our audience. But we have a dinner and a movie event with them. We've had 3 events with them. We've shown movies like Chasing Ice, I Am Red, and most recently Shifting Ice, Changing Tides. I always forget the name of that one. But some really impactful films about sustainability and climate change. And then most recently, we've also been partnering with POW, Protect Our Winters, to do a carpool event to promote public transportation and carpooling. And then also with all of those organizations, we do advocacy work as well. A lot with Phil signing on to some letters. We were out in front of the EPA for the Clean Power Plan 2 winters ago. I think it was 2 winters, yeah. So really important. I mean, I think our partnerships have really helped us take the initiative and help us be, they're like our driving force kind of to get out there and do the right thing. And then most recently, like Judy was just speaking of, the Summit County Partners in Energy, which I think this is one of the really coolest things because we're collaborating with the ski areas in Summit County when it comes to climate change. So, 99% of the time we are competing against each other for the skier visits and what have you, but through this program, we have all come to the table and we're going to set some goals and reduce our energy consumption. And I think that's really cool. I think that's one of the coolest partnerships that we've got going right now. And I think it says a lot for our community of ski areas and that everybody is on board and really wants to make change. So partnerships, I think, have been key to our success and sustainability. Mike's going to talk more about hardcore mitigation, like what are we really doing on the ground, boots on the ground at Basin.
I like that term, hardcore mitigation. Yeah, so Shaw talked a lot about the whys and the whos that we work with on all this stuff, but definitely more of the hows. We have a lot of sustainability initiatives and guidelines that are in place at the Basin that we hope will shape our employees and our guests' just everyday behaviors and create this culture around sustainability at the ski area. Many of these initiatives are, like Shaw said, brass tacks, just hard-nosed to the ground stuff. One really successful one that we've done a lot of work with is our waste reduction program. We compost and recycle a huge amount of our waste and end up diverting a pretty significant portion of our waste stream from the landfill. The most recent numbers I have showed our landfill diversion rate to be up above 42% now, which I don't know exactly what other ski areas or other destination hospitality type businesses do, but I feel like personally standing at the trash can, seeing the people that come up with their cafeteria waste, 42% feels pretty good to me. Last year we composted over 50,000 pounds, which is I'm pretty proud of personally, considering my hands are usually pretty nasty from compost juices and stuff. But another big part of that is we've got some great support from our upper management and the people that manage food and beverage and all of our operations. We're moving away from bottled water. We have hydration stations in all of our cafeterias that are really just water coolers with reusable cups. Speaking of reusable, the vast majority of the stuff we have in our cafeterias is real plates and forks and knives and cups. We have no disposable cutlery or paper plates or styrofoam trays, none of that. So that's contributed pretty significantly to cutting back on our waste. We also promote our employees and our guests to bring, we have e-waste collection kind of events. And we also are a member, or work with TerraCycle, who is a small company that works to recycle all kinds of typically non-recyclable items like chip bags and Cliff Bar wrappers and things like that. Another big thing that we do every day is we're really pushing for carpooling and public transportation. To this time of year especially, we obviously have a pretty tight parking situation up there, so there's definitely other motivations, but we offer some pretty big discounts on lift ticket prices for folks that carpool or ride the Summit Stage, which is our free bus system up there in Summit County. We've actually found that people coming to the window who know about our ticket discounts for carpooling has increased by 27% 2 years ago and 29% this year. So the public kind of perception and people actually taking advantage of that is definitely growing. We obviously need it to continue to grow. The I-70 corridor, we could probably have a whole other panel discussion on that. But it's really making a difference for us at the ski area. What else do I have? We also, we have energy use guidelines that really focus on our employees responsibly using energy. We're not afraid to tell new hires to bring 2 or 3 pairs of socks because they're not going to be able to crank the heat in their office. We have occupancy sensors and light harvesting sensors in a lot of our buildings and are adding them to our older buildings. We also have a no idling policy, which was adapted from the National Ski Areas Association to limit our fuel consumption in all of our vehicles. We also have purchasing guidelines that empower some of our management and the people making kind of product decisions up there to allow them to spend a little bit more money on a uniform that's going to last for a few years rather than replacing one every year, or buying things that we sell in our retail store that maybe are a little bit more responsibly sourced and produced. All of that stuff I think really plays into, just as I mentioned, the general culture and kind of feel of sustainability around there that really honestly pervades from the top all the way down to the line level employees that just show up for their first winter, which I think we are pretty lucky to have. In addition to sort of the behavioral stuff, we also, we like to think about all that as the low-hanging fruit, and I think we've been really good at picking most of that fruit so far. But we're getting to the point where we're running out of that stuff, so we're starting to tackle these bigger ticket items and larger projects that have more immediate and probably easier to track results as far as greenhouse gas emissions reductions. One thing, about 5 years ago, as Shaw said, we started, and Judy mentioned the climate challenge. We've been tracking all of our resource use and consumption, and that really kind of can show us where we can work on and improve. About 5 years ago, we did a lighting retrofit. We replaced more than 500 fixtures and light bulbs around the ski area. That was an immediate reduction of, I think, according to one of the calculations, 80 to 100 metric tons of greenhouse gas equivalent. We also recently upgraded our 6-alley bar, and kind of as a part of that, installed a bunch of breezeways and airlocks, which, as simple as it sounds, a breezeway like that will save you so much on how much energy you're putting towards heat from just hundreds of people opening the door every day.
1,000, you counted, didn't you?
Or 1,000, yeah.
The bathrooms, the basin.
So yeah, so that was a huge impact. Last season we purchased and installed a waste oil furnace for our maintenance facility. So we are now burning motor oil, hydraulic fluid, transmission fluid, pretty much anything that comes out of any of our vehicles or even our lifts, which all have diesel backup motors, even though they run on electricity. So between last year and the first part of this year, we've purchased about 2,000 gallons less propane to heat that building. And we're also really promoting all of our employees and kind of the friends that are around there a lot to give us our oil. So not only are we getting to burn it, but it's also not getting dumped in some drain somewhere and finding its way down to the river and the ocean. Probably the biggest and best thing and most recent that we've done, which it's cycling through on one of these pictures, is our brand new Kids Center building, which houses our snow sports department and their whole operation. But it's a 7,000 foot square building. It was built, it's not LEED certified, but it was built to many of the green building standards that LEED prescribes to. And in addition to that, it's just a brand new building that has replaced two incredibly inefficient, almost 70-year-old buildings. So we're seeing huge dividends from that. But the best part about it is it has a solar array occupying the whole south-facing roof. It's only a 13 kilowatt array, but it's supposed to generate enough energy to account for half that building's use. And actually in 2015 it outproduced. So the first year that it was installed, it outproduced all of our estimates. And honestly, the coolest thing about that too is it's a brand new building, front and center in our base area. You couldn't come skiing at Basin and not see our solar panels. Which, as we mentioned, you know, the ski industry is a pretty small drop in the bucket as far as climate change, you know, the greenhouse gas emissions that are contributing to climate change. But our customer base is, like many of you folks in this room, probably very receptive to that kind of message. So we think that these outreach and advocacy tools, working with partners or having the biggest billboard you could have, which is this building, front and center when you get there, is incredibly valuable to us. That's pretty much the gist of it. I feel like we're getting there.
Perfect, yeah. Perfect at times, so thank you. Well, thank you so much. All right, well, we'll open it up to the audience for questions. Anything you want to explore with the panelists? Yes, sir.
Yeah, one comment and a question. Jorge, it was disconcerting being in Colorado for a very long time on the environmental, because I always thought of Colorado as a very environmental, progressive state, and to know that compared to at least California, we have some work to do to create that resistance. My question is, when we talk about the impacts, and I noticed that maybe it's missed, but Vail Resorts isn't on there. And one of the things is the impacts isn't just the ski operation, it's the model that Vail Resorts that uses quite a bit is development. That's where they're making their money. So, and that creates a lot of carbon footprint that goes all over because you're losing the trees, the green space, to create homes and residences that aren't even lived 100% of the time. They might be lived in 2 weeks, 4 months, 1 month. And there's also a social impact with that, because what that causes is the service industry employees to have to live in shanty towns like Leadville, Colorado, in mobile home parks, or live really far, and that creates carbon footprint because now they have to go farther, either public transportation or drive, to do their employment. So I'm just curious, from any of the panelists, is that being addressed? And with that, is there any kind of, you talked about LEED certified, I don't want the ski industry to have a LEED thing, but any shaming or saying, hey, Aspen or Basin, you are a star-rated company. Vail, you are F. So the point is is that being addressed, the whole development side of public corporation when it comes to ski resorts?
So the question being, is development being addressed in the climate change strategies for resorts?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, Rob, do you want to take that?
Probably your Director of Sustainability of Vail Resorts. Oh, no, Park City's great. I was just there this week.
Yeah.
Yes, the answer to that is absolutely yes. I mean, we understand that the hospitality side and the development side is a big part of the impact. Right, LEED is absolutely something we're pursuing in all of our new projects. what I would say is a bigger challenge that you might realize though is a lot of the development isn't actually us. Like it's third parties that do the development and own and operate many of those communities at our mountains. Are we partnering with them to try to push for sustainable development as much as possible? Absolutely. So where can we make an impact? Right? We can try to make sure that the design of the buildings is energy efficient, water efficient, et cetera. We do pursue LEED. We're big on the stormwater management piece, but in many cases it's us providing guidance to them because we're not actually directly responsible for the construction. We used to own a development arm, and Vail no longer owns that development arm. But broadly, at a higher level, like, do I think it's a good idea to sort of rate? I mean, should there be good transparency around sustainability of ski resorts? Absolutely. I would say if you look at, so I'm relatively new to the role, but if you look at what we've done in terms of energy efficiency, like, across our resorts, our goal is basically about a 20% reduction by 2020. We're at 17% versus our baseline. Big investments in energy efficiency, big investments in water quality and stormwater management. I would say you'll see more of an emphasis on what I'll call forest management and forest health, because we recognize that's a great way to mitigate the carbon impact of our. There's things that are hard to mitigate, the transportation of many skiers coming from our mountains, but there are things that we can do. So my role was created relatively recently. It was created probably to help address some of the things that you discussed, but I would say there's probably more happening in general at Vail Resorts than you think, and I would argue that where we've taken on new resorts or acquisitions, we're improving the environmental footprint of these resorts. My perception coming from outside the ski industry is that it's sort of been the Wild West, sort of pun intended. There hasn't been a lot of, I think, really forward-looking or innovation or innovative work around sustainability ski resorts. So I think there's a lot more coming. I did have a question actually for the panel though, if I could briefly. So you talked about, I think Judy, you talked about the mic as well, that you've got programs, incentive programs in place to try to affect skier behavior. So for example, the transportation piece, which I think is absolutely the right direction. So there's a little difference in saying that more people are coming to your window and they know about the carpooling. Maybe they were carpooling anyway, and they just know about it now. Have you actually been able to track changes in transportation, like more people taking the shuttles or more people carpooling versus a baseline of X period of time? And how effective have those programs really been?
Well, we at a Basin at least have not necessarily tracked every day over a whole season how many people are carpooling. However, it is clear we see the Summit Stage ridership numbers, and the Swan Mountain Flyer, which is the route that comes to a Basin from Breckenridge through Keystone, has seen a huge jump in ridership.
Yeah, 40% increase this year in ridership on the Summit Stage.
And you think that's because of awareness building, increasing the route frequency?
We don't know exactly. I mean, I think we hope that a lot of it is awareness and our promotion of it. Is it just more people coming to the ski area? I mean, there's all those factors. But I mean, I think we do a fairly good job at getting the word out to people. So, I mean, we hope that we're encouraging them. But whether we know it or not, I don't know.
I just want, for me, it's, I want to make sure that we're putting our emphasis in the right place. And if converting people from single car driving, I don't understand why we can't just put a train up
A whole nother conversation.
If I could build on that, and it kind of gets back to the question about development as well. I think it's also interesting to look what's happening in the ski towns, not just the ski resorts. And from our work, for example, in Park City, Utah, where we've helped them with their community greenhouse gas inventory, that's where you start picking up land use and development patterns as well as the transportation patterns. And I just think it's really pivotal that the ski areas are partnering with the ski towns in land use planning, and for that matter, then regional planning. So also, again, back to Utah, where Vail Resorts is now Canyons in Park City, and they are working with Park City on their carbon neutrality initiatives. There's a broader regional conservation planning and meets transportation planning effort called Mountain Accord, which is a really interesting project to watch as well, because it's zooming out to a larger scale to really get at where should development occur, where should it occur, what land should be conserved and protected, what transportation is best suited, and creating conservation planning dashboards and frameworks in order to inform them from a much more, I would say, triple bottom line framework or paradigm than has been used in the past. So that, I don't know if that answers some of what you're talking about. And then one other thing you brought up, which is second homes, which is part of the Summit County Climate Action Plan, and also a nod to Georgetown University and Jorge. If those of you who are familiar with the Georgetown Energy Prize, anybody familiar with that? Anyway, it's a national prize, and Summit County Power Works, which includes Park City, Utah, is one of the leading finalists in that, and they are getting very aggressive around all commercial, residential, but including an emphasis on second homeowners.
Just to even broaden what Judy Dorsey said more about the development aspect of ski resorts, that in my mind gets in another domain. And in the state of California, they have passed a mandate calling for every new residence to be net zero energy ready by 2020, whether it's in a ski resort or not. And I think, you know, what I'm hearing from the ski industry is very good. Keep that focus. Let's not saddle them with fixing buildings, but let's do fixed buildings. We had 22,000 new houses being developed in the Denver metro area with very little enforcement of energy standards other than code.
Thank you. Did you have a question? Or?
No, I just comment.
Let's go to the back. Yeah.
I wonder if there are any plans to incorporate incentivizing skiers to drive electric vehicles to the ski resorts, since they do not contribute to air pollution.
Yes.
And also maybe converting the snowmobiles and snow plows to natural gas or propane instead of diesel.
Yeah. Do you want to take it?
Sure. So as far as snowcats and vehicles on the mountain, you know, those are just part of doing business, unfortunately. We have been working with Prenoth on some grooming techniques that can definitely reduce fuel consumption and emission output. You know, the snowcats, newer snowcats are becoming more efficient. You know, they're very expensive. It's like one in, one out every couple of years for us anyway, but it's a huge expense for the ski areas to operate those machines, but we are phasing out some of those older models and introducing more efficient models of snowcats and snowmobiles.
I can comment on something. I think it's interesting or it's important to move away from just examples of good behavior and look at what the industry does on average. And this is kind of what we try to do in ours. Yes, Basin is an exemplary case of what ski area can do. But when you look at the population of the ski areas in the western U.S. and how they behave as they confront higher levels of uncertainty in the amount of snow they get, the most interesting part of our study, which is actually quite surprising for us, we were expecting to find the opposite, was that they do less mitigation on average as they face higher levels of uncertainty in the amount of snow that they get every year. So I think our messages are consistent. Yes, there is great examples of ski resorts doing very innovative green initiatives, whether it's in terms of energy efficiency or doing advocacy in Washington, D.C. to promote this type of policies or promoting carpooling. But the interesting thing about what we find is that on average, as the industry experiences more levels of uncertainty in the amount of snow they get, and as they experience more number of days that are above freezing during the ski season, they are doing less and less mitigation, unless they are in a state where what we call institutional pressures coming from environmentalists or regulators at the state level are high. Which for somebody that is a business school professor, of course, is not the message you want to find. No, you are in the business school, people don't like to hear about regulation, no? So if the industry want to be regulated less in the future, on average, the industry needs to show higher levels of mitigation, and that's not what we found, at least in this period of 2003 to 2013. Now, this is not to single out any specific resort. This is to talk about the average across the industry when you control the, for other reasons why they might be doing these things, which goes to your point of, are they carpooling or are they showing up to the ticket booth, say they're carpooling, and they're carpooling because they want to protect the environment, they already knew about it. So that's an important aspect to think about. There is great examples of good proactive environmental behavior, but at least based on what we find the average across the industry in the Western U.S. is that they do less mitigation as they experience more uncertainty in terms of climate change variables.
So I do have a follow-up question about that then, because I understood from your research, I think, where you're getting your adaptation data and what you're defining as adaptation, but what are we saying the same thing? When you say mitigation and we say mitigation, are we even referring to the same thing? Can you elaborate a bit on where that data comes from and what the definition is that in your research definition?
Well, when we talk about adaptation, we follow what is traditionally defined across the management field. No? So if you want to adapt, you can buffer yourself from external negative conditions. So in the case of a ski resort, you move out the mountain where you have low...
More on the mitigation side.
The mitigation will be to be more energy efficient, to buy renewable energy, to promote carpooling, all kinds of activities, or actually like lobbying for climate change policies, which, by the way, the industry is pretty good at it.
But that data isn't as publicly available as the adaptation data. So how do you?
Well, the ski areas have to report. If you are in a forest land, you have to report on whether you are buying renewable energy or not, and how much, how efficient are some of your machines. Now, where do we get the data? We got the data initially from the Ski Area Citizens Coalition, which is an coalition of environmental groups that is very critical of the industry. But the nice thing about their data is that they rely on, we went to the raw data where we look at the report. So, for example, for adaptation, we now track the number of acres of snow making capability that the ski area has. Or in terms of expansion, we can actually do that without going to the Ski Area Citizens Coalition. We can look at geographic information system maps that are publicly available, whether from NOAA, the National Oceanic Administration, or the Forest Service, or the Weather Service, and you can see how the ski area is expanding just by looking at a digital map. Then you can match that digital map to the temperature data, and you see how they behave. So I think the two messages are consistent. So yes, there's great examples of ski areas that are doing great work in terms of their environmental management, but on average, the trend is a negative trend. They do less mitigation as they experience more climate change uncertainty, and they do more adaptation, and they focus a great deal on adaptation.
Any comments from the panel before we take my questions?
In case you're interested, I just had to name one thing about electric vehicles since you had asked. Mount Abrams, Maine has electric vehicle charging stations, and also in Washington State, Stevens Pass. Thank you. And the National Skiers Association through Sustainable Slopes has a small grants program to try and support these types of early adoption technologies. So Mount Abrams has been like 5 years ago or so. In case that helps, that we are starting to see electric vehicle charging moving into the ski industry.
beach at the Basin maybe is mentioned.
We're working on
looking at
it.
the special closing
next-
day,
for
right?
next winter.
Over
Words out
here.
of our mouth.
So this has been touched on a few times tonight, but I want to go back to it. So my question is twofold. One, as you all know, tons of people drive up to mountains every single weekend to ski. And whether or not that is directly, emissions directly from the ski resorts, that is sort of, I feel like in part, the ski resort's responsibility. And so my first question is that being taken into account in any of the greenhouse gas emissions reduction reporting that's going on that you guys have seen? And then my second question is focused more just in general in Denver. I mean, have there been any discussions on getting better public transit up to the mountains, at least just from DIA? Because if people fly in, they don't want to get, an EV car or a front wheel drive car because they're not going to make it up to the mountains. They might have families. So there's everybody's going to be renting four-wheel drive vehicles that emit more and are less efficient to get up there. And so I feel like there are so many opportunities, other than just the Colorado Mountain Express, which is pretty expensive if you look into it, to expand public transit up to the mountains. And I think it would be a huge benefit for all the people on the Front Range who live ski. And I'm just curious if there are any conversations, movement, or any action in that realm.
I can answer the first one because it's super easy and quick, and then you guys probably have a lot more in depth of what's happening on regional transportation up to the ski areas. But the first question, ski areas in the Climate Challenge Report, Scope 1 and Scope 2 is required. Scope 3, which includes transportation, is voluntary, and some do, some don't. It's because the greenhouse gas accounting protocol for the kinds of emissions you're describing require modeling efforts and other things to provide that information. So it's usually in partnership then with the ski towns or the regional planning council or the transit authority or otherwise. So it's an excellent question. I think it's worth pointing out, so we are all talking apples to apples. When I was comparing campuses and ski areas and airports, I was using consistent methodology there, just FYI. But then to your other question about, what's happening and how do we deal with this?
Right.
So there is the I-70 Coalition. I believe they have been in discussion for almost 10 years now. I could be wrong on those numbers, but I think it's about 10 years. They've done lots of small projects, I guess I would call them, with the campaign to stay longer at the ski areas and enjoy what they have to offer before you drive home to mitigate some of the congestion. They've done some improvements to the roads along Idaho Springs in that area. But as far as better transportation to the mountains, they have not figured that out yet. There's been groups or businesses that have come and gone over the last few years to promote public transportation to the mountains. I think that it's not convenient enough for people to ride it. Why do I want to sit on a bus with all these strangers sitting in I-70 traffic when I can be in the comfort of my own vehicle? So that it's a huge problem, and we don't have the answer. What we try and do is encourage people to carpool. There's been several carpool organizations over the years, the Alpine Source, the Ski Lift. I don't know, they've come and gone. We were partnering with some of these guys last winter and they don't exist anymore. I mean, it's that just touch and go. But it's really important, and we do need a better solution for that I-70 traffic and congestion.
To kind of piggyback on that too, and Phil, I'm going to give you a shameless plug. So, I've noticed. I mean, I wear a lot of hats at the Basin. I'm the sustainability supervisor, but I end up parking cars on the weekends. I kind of see it all. I notice, and I don't know if there's really numbers that back this up, but Christmas break, spring break, the times when people are coming from out of the state and flying into DIA, yeah, you're right. They're renting massive Suburbans and Yukons and things like that. But they're piling out of the cars in our parking lot with 6 kids in the car. We run into issues. We have limited parking, so we really notice it. But I think the issue is more just the weekend, the local crowd from Denver.
And Summit County.
Well, I mean, everybody, yeah. People that are not destination visitors, coming up in their own car. And like Shaw touched on, you know, the public transportation, whether it's a bus or a train, it'll help, like definitely, but it might not be like convenient enough for everybody to really buy into it. I think what really has to happen, and as I mentioned, Phil's group, Snow Riders, has worked pretty strongly on this with their Less Drive, More Ride campaign, is honestly you guys getting together with your friends. And because that's pretty convenient, and you know your friends are probably gonna like the same music as you. You don't have to listen, you don't have to watch whatever they show on the Greyhound bus. You know, I personally think that is a more viable option because, you know, like I said, I'm in the parking lot and I see 3 cars pull up next to each other with one person in it, and they all get out and give each other hugs, and they're parked next to each other, and you know what I mean. So, Phil, I don't know if you had more to add to that, but that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good take. And again, I'm with Snow Riders International, we're a group of skiers, boarders, and mountain recreation enthusiasts that work to protect the environment and largely work on climate change, sustainable transportation to the slopes like carpool, bus, and rail. And so, yeah, we've definitely been highlighting the work that Basin's doing to give carpool incentives, and we think that that is a great solution. If ski areas provide more carpool lots and discounts the lift ticket office, you will see more people coming to at least say that they've carpooled to get this discount. And in terms of the public transit question, going back to your question, it is theoretically possible now to go from DIA up the I-70 corridor. You know, the new Metro line rail opened on April 22nd on Earth Day. Fantastic new rail that goes from the airport to downtown. And you can take that and then you can hop on the Mustang, which is a CDOT initiative that goes right up I-70. And it is an affordable bus with Wi-Fi, and unfortunately it like only goes once a day from each direction, and it doesn't necessarily help skiers because it goes in the afternoon going west. So that's been expanded to the fullest potential it can be expanded by the Colorado Department of Transportation. And so now the question is, how can we encourage growth in that? And is it up to simply the state, or is it also up to a public-private partnership, or some private incentives like maybe Vail Resorts or some other ski area towns coming together to help produce more buses that will then take cars off the road and provide more skier mass transit. And then the Winter Park Ski Train is another example of something that could help and be a symbol of mass transit that we're trying to get back. So there are things happening, and theoretically you can take mass transit to the mountains. Most mountain towns have a free mass transit system once you get there. So all of these things should be taken into consideration, and but we definitely need to be doing more, and that's part of our campaign, Let's Drive More Ride, and the Riders for Rail and all that. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think just my 2 cents, you really ask an insightful question that is, I think, bigger than just the topic of ski area sustainability. And going back to some of my opening comments, I referenced that our population is supposed to double by 2050. And I mean, I live in Denver, I've been here for over 5 years now, and I've experienced the gridlock traffic, the increase in rush hour. I frequent the mountains all the time on the weekend, so I'm guilty of those greenhouse gas emissions. But I do carpool, I promise, as much as I can. Actually, every time I go. But I think your question gets to, writ large, what is Denver, what is the Front Range going to do to address mobility and transportation as people continue to flock to our state? Before moving here, I lived in Hawaii, and it was gridlocked every day, all the time. I mean, there was, I think, the quota when I left 5 years ago was there was 2.5 cars to every one person on the island. And just looking at transportation overall is really a huge conversation that we need to have as a nation. And if anyone's familiar with Tony Seba, his work with, I think it's called Disruptive Innovation is his book, and he has a YouTube video, it's about 50 minutes long, and his theory is by the year 2030, autonomous electric vehicles will basically be all over the world, and it's really innovation happening faster than any of us could ever predict. So I think your comment is really insightful, and I think it's bigger than just pinpointing the ski area industry and solving that problem. It's a national thing that we need to address as we continue to advance. We are at time. You've had your hand up for a while. Do you want to ask the last question?
Sure. My question's pretty wonkish. It's about renewable energy certificates. In 2007, the ski industry created a big push to buy wind power through the vehicle of renewable energy certificates. A lot of press, national press. My sense of what has happened is that the ski industry has kind of fallen away. I would like your impressions of, and there are those in the ski industry, there's one individual in particular that says buying RECs is a waste of money. It doesn't produce actual power. I would like to have your impressions of whether RECs are a good investment for the ski industry to further the cause of mitigation.
So we jumped on the bandwagon. We were offsetting 100% of our electrical use with wind power. You know, depending, we were spending anywhere from, we're one of the smaller guys, we were spending anywhere from $15,000 to $22,000 a year on renewable energy credits. I don't think that we believed that it was a waste. I think we were purchasing clean energy, which is important. But we also then took a look at what we could do with $22,000 at the ski area. And at that time, and still to this date, a lot of our buildings are very grossly inefficient. So that clean energy is just going right out the door. So we decided that we were going to stop purchasing those renewable energy credits, and we were going to put that money into projects each year at the ski area. So those projects that Mike mentioned, the lighting, the clean burn, that is a result of those funds. You know, moving forward, our sustainability program is growing. Like Mike said, we've got great buy-in from the top down. So we're hoping that those funds increase. But that was how we managed those renewable energy credits and why we stopped purchasing. Not because we thought it wasn't a good thing, it just wasn't a good thing for us anymore. We needed that money to do other things with.
And then we would, as consultants, put forth a hierarchy of your mitigation strategy. And first is energy efficiency, or eliminating waste, on-site renewables, RECs, so that there is a hierarchy, and maybe reinvesting savings into RECs if you're driving for carbon neutrality, for example. So we have, I call them enlightened RECs or next generation RECs. I think we should all constantly be reevaluating RECs because they're evolving as an instrument for achieving system-wide reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So I completely agree. For a small business in the circumstances here, it made perfect sense. And as we consult, we encourage a hierarchy approach and kind of decision making so that the total bang for buck is there. And one small quick example, in the University of California system where we've been consulting, they have a mandate from the university president, Janet Napolitano, to reach neutrality by 2025. And so that basically is calling for almost elimination of cogen plants on campuses, or you can imagine all the impacts. But onto this question of RECs, what about RECs where you're stimulating development in the technologies that are being commercialized out of the universities into developing countries where we can make more significant impact and look at a system? So it is a very wonkish question. I love the wonkish questions, and the consultant's answer is in the hierarchy, and that we always are reevaluating because we see RECs, like everything, improving. Just like technologies improve, so do RECs.
Well, I would. I'm going to give you an answer that if you're an environmentalist, you're going to like it, but climate change is a global problem, and if you can buy RECs that are certified by a credible organization and that makes you carbon neutral, that's a great thing. Even if you're not doing anything in your ski area. Now, I know environmental groups hate that answer. But if you're trying to deal with a global problem, it doesn't matter if the carbon reduction emissions happen in Botswana and you are emitting CO2 in Aspen. From the perspective of a global challenge that we are facing, what we need is lower carbon emissions at the global level. Some companies, some ski areas may have the capability to do it in-house, but others don't. So RECs are one of the most efficient ways to actually deal with this problem for the average key area resort in the industry that doesn't have the capability that a Basin or an Aspen in company would have. So they are mounted by the environmentalists, but the truth is that from a global perspective, they are a great tool if they are certified by a credible organization. Now, I know that if you're an environmentalist, many of them don't like this answer, but from the perspective of a global problem, they are a great tool. They should be used more. They have to be certified by a credible organization, and that's the important condition.
Please join me in thanking Mike, Shaw, Judy, and Jorge for their presentation tonight.